Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm Marilyn and my channel is Making with Marilyn. Now it is getting close to the month of November and you know what that means. It's time to make some Christmas items. So in today's video, I'm going to make a sublimation tumbler and I'm going to make it in this HTV Ront auto tumbler press. Now the first thing that I notice about this is it's not real heavy. It doesn't take a huge footprint. It's very sleek, very pretty. But all that is meaningless if it doesn't work well. So stick around if you want to see the outcome of my tumbler. Here's the items that I'm going to use in today's video. I'm going to print an image that I got off of Creative Fabrica onto this HTV Ront sublimation paper. This HTV Ront paper is my absolute go-to paper. I love it. I use it in a lot of videos and it really is about the only paper I use anymore. Now, I don't have this in the larger sizes, so I do use other brands when it comes to printing larger sizes. Once I print my image, then I'm going to cut it down using a ruler, a rotary blade, and a cutting mat. I'm going to use a tumbler that I got from Alibaba. Now, these are not my favorite tumblers, but it's what I have on hand right now. I usually like to use Hippo tumblers or HTV Ront tumblers, and I've used a few others that I really like. But again, today we're going to use a tumbler I got off of Alibaba. Now, before I wrap it with my sublimation paper, I'm going to clean it with this 90% rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. Then when it comes time to wrapping the image around the tumbler, I'm going to use a generous amount of heat-resistant tape. Honestly, I feel like the quality of your tape job is a big factor on how well your tumblers turn out, especially the bottom and the top of the tumblers. When I'm actually heating the tumbler, I'm going to use this heat-resistant glove. Now, it's heat-resistant. It is not heat-proof, so it can still get really hot through this. And then when I take my tumbler out of the HTV Ront Auto Tumbler Press, I'm actually going to set it on a porcelain tile to let it cool just enough that I can handle it. All right, here's my image. It looks really nice, but you can tell it's not super vibrant. That's the way sublimation ink is. It prints out, it's not super vibrant, but when you add that heat to it, it really pops. The other thing is, just remember, in most instances, when you're doing sublimation, you have to mirror your image. The only things that I've made where you don't mirror your image is when I'm doing something where the sublimation is under my item and you're looking through the item at the sublimated image. That's the only time when I haven't mirrored my image. And then I've actually had quite a few questions lately on, do you have to use sublimation ink? Do you have to use a sublimation printer? Do you have to use sublimation paper? So for a sublimation tumbler such as this, first of all, your blank has to be sublimation ready. You have to use sublimation ink. Now, I use an Epson printer that I actually just put sublimation ink into instead of the ink that came with it. And the one that I use for this is an Epson EcoTank 15,000. So the EcoTanks, or the Eco Tanks as some people call them, those to me are the easiest Epsons to change to sublimation. And then even though some people just use regular copy paper, I tried that. I didn't have great results, so I always use a sublimation paper. Okay, so I printed my image at 9.4 inches wide by 8.2 inches tall. Now that might be the right size for you. It truly all depends on your sublimation tumbler. So be sure and measure it and then print your image according to the size of your tumbler. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clean this with rubbing alcohol. This is 90% rubbing alcohol. Some people don't do this step and they get great results, but I kind of figure for a few minutes or a few seconds and a little bit of rubbing alcohol, to me, it's just a good idea to do it. That's all I do right there. I make sure my table is dry because I am going to put my image down in a minute. And then I just set this aside and let it dry. Alcohol dries very quickly, so it's not going to cause you a lot of extra time. Now, usually I use my larger cutting mat. It's out of the room right now, so we're just going to use this. what I want to do is I want to go ahead and cut off all the white paper. Use whatever cutting device works best for you. I have found that a ruler and a rotary blade work best for me. I have one of those guillotine cutters. I also have the ones that slide, and for some reason I don't do those very well. I tend to bunch up the paper, and so my best results have been using a rotary tool. Again, you might have better results with something else. So I'm just cutting off all the white, and actually I'm cutting off just a tiny bit of the design just to make sure I don't have any white. If you put white against your sublimation tumbler, of course you're going to have a white streak on your tumbler. So I like to cut away all that white. Now that's especially important to me on the sides, and especially on one side. So at least on one side, I'm going to make sure all the white's gone, and then you can see on this, I actually cut away a tiny bit of the design. Hopefully you can see that. There's just a little bit of the design that I cut off. Now, as long as I make sure that this is against my tumbler, and when I wrap it, this is on top. I don't have to cut all this white away, but I still like to. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap the tumbler and tape it up. Now, I use a lot more tape than many people do. It's just what I do, and I usually get really good results on my tumblers. So I'm going to put my tumbler where the top of the tumbler is against the table. I'm going to flip my design upside down. So here's what it looks like. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap the paper around it. Now what I do is I look at each side and I decide which I think is most important. I like how this side has a little bit of a black edge to it, so I want that against my tumbler, and then I'll put this over the top of it. I like to make sure that the bottom lines up and the top lines up. Now, sometimes I use what's called a pinch perfect tool. It's like having a third hand. It is really, really convenient, but it's not absolutely necessary. So what I'm going to do is pull this paper really tight, put the tape on the piece of paper that's on top, and then really pull that paper tight, and then tape it down. Now the bottom of the tumbler's beveled, and so to me it's not quite as important to get the bottom right as it is to get the top right. That's what it looks like so far. Then usually what I do is I go ahead and I put my hand in here and I kind of tap my paper until it's just slightly above the top of the tumbler. That way I don't accidentally get a white streak at the top. Now, I don't like to have a lot of paper above the top of the tumbler because as you fold it over, you tend to get those puckers. And so I want the top of the paper to be almost even with the top of the tumbler, slightly above it. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm going to finish this seam. So I'm going to put the tape on the top piece of paper, make sure it's stuck to that top piece, and then I'm going to pull it tight and get that tape put down. Now there's a little bit of excess tape, so I'll pull it tight and just press it over the top and onto the inside. Now let's do the same thing on the bottom half. Now at this point, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and put a strip of tape around the top of the tumbler, and I like to have it end about even with the top of the paper. Then after I get that layer on, I do a second layer that goes above that, and I fold that over to the inside. So I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. Now, this is the top side, this is underneath. So the paper on this side is on top of that side. So to me, it's important that when I do this, that I put the tape down and I pull with the way the paper is laying. And I'm trying to get it even with about the top of the tumbler. So let me show you what I mean. I want to pull this piece of paper, which is on top, over and tight. What I don't want to do is pull against the seam and kind of open it. And then my tape is relatively even with the top. Not super even, but relatively even. So that's holding that paper firm so that it's not going to crinkle up. Now this next layer of tape, I'm going to go in the same direction, and I'm going to have it way above the top of the tumbler. I'm going to pull it tight. I'm stretching it, and that gives a little bit of a rebound effect. And then I'm just going to go around and push it straight over the top of the tumbler. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. I like to have the bottom of the paper end about even with the bottom of the tumbler. So it's going to slightly curve in over the beveled edge of the tumbler, and usually that gives me great results. Once again, yes, I use a lot of tape. You may feel like that's wasteful, but I do what works for me, and you do what works for you. If you have great results, do it the way you do it. But if you're finding that you're having little white streaks or ghosting or anything like that at the top or the bottom of your tumblers, try this out. See if it works for you. Okay, now as I'm doing this, I realized that in the intro, I didn't talk about having extra butcher paper or copy paper to wrap around this, and I do that to protect the heat press. Sometimes your sublimation ink can come back through the backside of your paper, and I don't want to deposit that onto the press, and so I always use some extra butcher paper around this. So let me go ahead and grab that. Now here's what the top of this HTV Ront auto press looks like. Let me tilt it on its side so you can see that's where the tumbler goes. We have a power button, a temperature button, a time button, and then you can adjust your temperature and your time with these up and down arrows. Once you're ready for this to close up and sublimate your tumbler, you press this button right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and turn the power on. Now right now it's set to 380 degrees for 60 seconds. I want to change that time. I want to go ahead and go with 390. So I press the temperature and then just push this up arrow. Then I want to adjust my time. I'm going to go with 70 seconds. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my tumbler in, heat it for 70 seconds. It'll open up. I'll rotate it 180 degrees. I'll do it for another 70 seconds. Now while this is heating up, let me tell you how I like to put my tumblers in. There's a lot of people that like to put their seams up. To me, it seems like as it presses in, it could cause a gap right here. That's just my opinion. I can be wrong, but what I like to do is I like to turn it so that the seam is either toward me or away from me. So I'll turn it this way. I'll heat it for those 70 seconds. It'll open up. I'll rotate it 180 degrees this way. We'll heat it another 70 seconds, and then I'll take it out and let it cool just enough so I can handle it. The other thing is, because I'm right-handed, I like my opening to be on this right side. That way, when it opens up, I can use my right hand with the heat glove, and then I can turn it and close it right back up. Now, when I scanned the manual that came with this, they gave you a range of temperatures they recommended for stainless steel tumblers, and I'm within that. And then they gave you a range of times. Now, the times that they gave you, I think they said from 120 seconds to 240 seconds. So mine will be 140 seconds. It's closer to the bottom end, but I have overcooked many tumblers and it ends up fading them. So I'm going to start with 140 seconds. We'll see how that turns out. Now here's the butcher paper that I'm going to use, and it's much larger than the tumbler. I like to use it as a cradle. So I don't just wrap it around this like you could do if you're using regular printer paper. I use it as a cradle, and it helps me to guide this in and out of the press. So remember, I want my opening to be on the right side because I'm right-handed, and then I'm going to start with the seam facing me. Now when you do this, you want to make sure that the bottom of the tumbler and the top of the tumbler are well within the sides of this press. They are now, so I'm going to press this R, and that closes it up. All right, so let's look at this. Okay, I'm trying to look at it. There looks like there is virtually no gap between the back side of this and the front side of this. So it looks like it closes up really tightly around this 20-ounce tumbler, or at least there's no gap at the top. It's hard to tell how tight it is. It is an auto press, so you don't get to adjust the temperature. But I'm pushing on the bottom of this tumbler and it's not moving at all. It feels very firm. So let's hope for the best. So my first 70 seconds are done and it opened up and I can see some steam rising. So I'm just going to kind of hold this paper up and I'm going to rotate my tumbler 180 degrees so the seam is at the back. And then we'll press this R. It's going to close up, and it feels like it's closing up nice and tight. Now I can see my tumbler's too far to the right, so I'm going to go ahead and open that up immediately. Move it down a little bit, or move it to the left a little bit. All right, that looks better. So I'll press it again. And now I think it's centered so much better than what I had it. Now when my tumbler comes out, I'm going to put it on this porcelain or this ceramic tile. I'll let it cool. I don't let them cool down all the way. I'm just not that patient. But I'll let it cool enough that I can actually work with it. We'll unwrap it, and hopefully this turns out to be a beautiful tumbler. All right, let's go ahead and take this out, and then I'll just set it up on this little tile over here. Now, if you didn't notice earlier, I said these are heat resistant. They are not heat proof. And so actually that was pretty hot on my hand when I took this out. You get 2 of these with the tumbler press and you get some tape. I can go ahead and turn this off and move it to the side. Now, one thing I didn't notice is, let's see how hot the bottom of it is. Okay, that's not hot at all. It's barely warmer than room temperature. So I feel very confident this isn't going to do anything bad to the table that it's on. I'm going to let this cool down, probably 3 or 4 minutes, really no longer than that. Some people will let them cool all the way down. Again, I'm just not that patient. I want to see what it looks like. Now, it is important to let them cool down a little bit, because here's what can happen. If they are scorching hot, if they are such a high temperature that sublimation can occur, and you take this paper off and you slide it, really you could cause a little bit of blurring or ghosting, and you don't want to do that. So let it cool down enough that it's not going to do that, but you don't have to let it cool down all the way, unless you want to. All right, I've waited a few minutes. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Now, I remember when I started sublimation hearing some people that talked about when you take these out of an oven or a press, they'd put them under cold water. I've never done that. I really don't see a lot of YouTubers that do that, but I guess that would be an option. So I just make a little slit in this tape, and notice the tape kind of came up in the heat. And I start by just taking off the top and the bottom tape. I'm going to make a little slit in this next piece of tape. Oh, it came off on accident, and that's looking good. I'll show you in just a minute. Okay, so let's pull this bottom piece up and make a slit in it. That slit just lets you kind of peel it off a little bit more easily. Now, when you have scissors or weeding tools or anything like that close to your tumbler, be really careful because you can scratch your tumbler coating, and you don't want to do that. Now, even though this tumbler is still warm, it is not really hot at all. Oh, you can see it. I was going to make you wait. But let's go ahead and reveal it. That's pretty. That is really nice. Okay, one thing I noticed, and this was in the design, so I want to point this out to you. See the little lighter parts against the M and the Y and the C? That was actually in the design. So check out the design. Here's my back seam. Now it feels like there's a little bit of remnants of paper on that, so let me clean that off. Right there is where I see it, and I can feel it. Okay, so that cleaned right off. There's my back seam right here. There's my top seam. That looks nice. It looks like I could have had my paper just a little bit higher because it looks like I might see a tiny little white streak. That has nothing to do with the press. If anything, I just didn't have my paper quite high enough on the tumbler. And then let's look at the bottom seam. I'm really happy with that. Now, you can see a little white where the tumbler bevels under. But as it's sitting on the table and your eyes are up here, that's something you don't even notice. If your paper is so long that you have to curve it under the tumbler, that's when you get those wrinkles and those puckers. I prefer it like this. The press did a really nice job at the bottom and the top. But again, remember, I think that your tumblers are a product of how well you do your tape job. That's just my opinion. I do see other people on YouTube that don't do much tape and they have nice tumblers. I didn't get great tumblers until I added more tape. I'm really happy with them now. And then isn't this image so cute? That animal print with kind of the glittery effect here. It's not really glittery, but it's like splotchy effect. That's in the design. And then the buffalo plaid. I love this. I think it's adorable. Now, if you haven't started getting ready for Christmas, you better get started. It's going to be here before we know it. It's crazy. I heard somebody say the other day how many days it was before Christmas. And it really made me think it is time to get started on my Christmas things. If you're interested in checking out the HTV Ront press, I will have a link to it in the video description. So here's my final result. Merry Christmas. It's super cute. I'm going to enjoy drinking my iced coffee out of this tumbler. So thanks so much for joining me today, and until my next video, bye-bye. Now on today's video, I'm going to make a sublimation tumbler